Out of all the most overpowered and broken characters in Bleach, none have had Kubo's personal seal of overpoweredness like the father of all Quincy, Yhwach. He stands at the pinnacle of power, and today we'll be looking at all of the 5 forms that Yhwach's had throughout the series, starting from the beginning of his birth all the way to his cosmic completion. By the end of this video, you'll be surprised at how unfair he actually is. Around 1200 years ago, a baby was born. He couldn't hear, speak, move, or see. A pretty nasty existence, yet there was no fear in the baby, as if he knew that he would live on. What's weirder was the people's reaction to Yhwach. Every time one of them touched him, they gained a strange power, acquiring something they lacked. Soon, he began to be worshipped as a sort of messiah. The reason he could do this was because the power they acquired was Yhwach's own. Yhwach has the ability to give pieces of his soul to others, making them stronger as these fragments become a part of them. But those souls also become a part of those fragments. Soon after these people touch Yhwach, they die, but still more arrive to touch him, and more of his soul is spread out and returned upon their death, their knowledge, power, and being becoming Yhwach. With this, the baby began to hear, see, and eventually function as any baby could. Well, like any god baby would. This was Yhwach's first form, a baby worshipped as a god, with the hunger of one too. Now, let's talk about Yhwach's form, that of a young conqueror. During his youth, he came up with another way to evolve his soul-sharing technique, Shrift. Yhwach had acquired the ability to see into someone and make note of a word that corresponds with their personality. For those he wishes to bless with his Shrift, they drink Yhwach's blood in a ritual that mirrors the Christian ritual of sacrament, further tying Yhwach's rank as a deity among the Quincy and telling us that he feels himself to be one too. After they drink it, Yhwach engraves a letter on the Quincy's soul, bonding them to himself, as well as granting them a piece of his soul and with it his power. This power allows the blessed to unlock their own innate power, which now also belongs to Yhwach in a way. Those given Yhwach's Shrift are called Sternritter, and the first known member would be Lige Baro. It was also through this that Yhwach assigned himself the alphabet A, giving him the power of Almighty, the frankly broken ability of Foresight. Once, this was the sole designation of his father, the Soul King, but as a demigod himself and son of the Soul King, whether biological or spiritual, he was able to use this power as well, though not to the same level. There is also the evolution of his soul-sharing ability that he now calls Oswheelan. Its power is tied to his Shrift, as it entails giving pieces of his soul to other Quincy's, but he's now also learned to distribute it to others. Beams of light crash down on those with Yhwach's soul fragments, and 3 things are likely to happen. 1. Yhwach only takes a partial amount of the Quincy that he consecrated, so they're still able to utilize their abilities. 2nd, their strength is completely taken, but they remain alive. 3rd is annihilation, as the Quincy is drained of every last drop of their essence until they're killed. Yhwach gets a major power boost from this consecration, and can also distribute the powers to his remaining Stern Raiders if needed. Hell, it can even be used to bring them back from the dead. That's not all though. It was around this time that he began unifying the Quincy, as more and more declared him to be their founder, though history is unclear if that's actually true. What is certain is that he began unifying them, taking over the northern territories in the living world, and eventually forming his own Quincy Empire in around 200 years. This empire was called Lichtreich. The new regime wasn't formed easily or peacefully. There was bloodshed, destruction, and massacres as he brought all to heel. It was also around this time that he met his other half, the Quincy Hashvalt. He was selected because the child was the only other who could share pieces of his soul like Yhwach could, and Hashvalt has served faithfully since then. With this, Yhwach begins the formation of the Sternritter, which he will use to conquer the few places not in his control, Soul Society. This was Yhwach beginning to understand the depths of his strength, experimenting with both himself and his people. It shows us how Yhwach came to have the powers he does and what he would become if there were no obstructions. He was a brash emperor, sure in his ways and ambitions, only deepening as he began to see more of what he thought was wrong in the world. This is probably one of the weakest but no less important forms he has. Quite some years later, Yhwach meets with the commander of the Royal Guard, Ichibei Hyosube. Word of Yhwach's intention to expand his borders beyond mortal ken has the Shinigami wary, so he goes to negotiate a truce. He promises Yhwach that they will leave him alone to unite the Quincy so long as the soon-to-be-called Shinigami gets to handle the balance between worlds. The thing is, Yhwach's intention ran deeper than expected, and it seems he has issues with the current system of existence where the living now fear death. Turns out, it was his father. The Soul King's the one to switch things up. Yhwach wasn't having any of this and declared he was going to continue with his assault and started it off by assaulting the super monk. That was a mistake. Ichibei pulled out the arm of the Soul King to stop Yhwach. The attempt failed, but it was still enough for Ichibei to seal away Yhwach's almighty and proclaim that he could never use it until his death. Though he says he's fine losing the Almighty, it was the trump card for his conquest of the worlds, and without it, he has no certainty on his victory. On the plus side, he has gained a terrifyingly powerful subordinate in the left arm of the Soul King, who technically counts as a Quincy, what with the Soul King having links to all races. Still, Yhwach is in for a rough time. This can be seen during the first Quincy invasion of Soul Society. Yhwach's army was well into the battle, slaughtering Shinigami left and right. It was looking good. That is, until he met Genryusai Shikakuni Yamamoto. The two of them clashed in an epic showdown where Yhwach has potentially used the known Quincy skills like Bleach, which provides immense protection. Despite that, Yhwach suffered defeat at Yamamoto's hand after his vice captain Chojuro Sasakibe stabbed him in the back. Reports on what happened after were strange, as there was no confirmation of a body nor of Yhwach's death, but he was gone from the world's notice. This was his third form, and the one that represented his greatest failure. The fact is that even with Almighty, there was no guarantee that he would have won. The Shinigami in those days had a level of power and bloodlust rarely seen, and Yhwach was still quite inexperienced with his Almighty, only allowing him to see a few futures at a time. This is based on the fact that he couldn't avoid Ichibe's ceiling. More on his Almighty will be discussed once we get to the point where he has better control, but the fact is that Yhwach's overconfidence is what led to his fall. But he is still Yhwach, and so he will one day rise. But if you don't want to be ganged up on by a bunch of criminals like Yhwach, make sure to like and subscribe. This is the fourth form of Yhwach, and it's also the one we've known and seen the most of. We're gonna start it off with a little history of an old song of the Quincy, Kaiser Kasam. It recounts a sealed king who would regain his pulse after 900 years, his mind after 90 more years, his strength after 9 years, and the world after 9 days. As you've guessed, this is the tale of Yhwach, and it goes pretty much as it says. After his fall, Yhwach becomes something similar to when he was first born and waits years for himself to return. After he regained his mind, his strength returned by taking the powers of all impure Quincy, such as Kanae Katagiri, Uryu Ishida's mother, who died as a result, and Masaki Kurosaki, Ichigo's mother, who also died as a result since, with her powers gone, the Grand Fisher was able to kill her. Hence, all of the impure Quincy are dead except Uryu Ishida. Thanks to that power boost, Yhwach was able to move and plan his next attempt at invading Soul Society and reaching his father. This is a bit of a mystery, whether on purpose for fan speculation or Kubo just straight up forgot. But Yhwach has built himself an arsenal with his new Quincy army, especially the Sternritter. Of course, the theories behind how he got them could be that he either found pureblood Quincy's and brought them to the fold, brought back those that have fallen with his Oswalin, or found them in Soul Society, since it's confirmed there are some there based on Mayuri's word that he experiments on some of them. During the 17 months since Aizen's defeat, Yhwach has been busy with his conquest. Since Soul Society is still not on the table, he's gone and conquered Hueco Mundo, defeating its ruler Tia Harabel and establishing the area for his Vandenreich, his army. This was one of the foundations in which they would invade Soul Society, as he had already tasted defeat before, and Yhwach was going to make sure that this wouldn't turn out like the last time. Then comes the second invasion of Soul Society, and it's proven to be much more effective than the last. An initial scouting team headed over and decimated the vicinity, but the real cincher is Yhwach's confrontation with Genryusai Shikakuni Yamamoto. Learning from his last encounter, and because no one in Bleach can make good judgment calls, Yamamoto goes all out, unleashing his Bankai and showing everyone why he's the captain commander when he destroys Yhwach. Except, that wasn't him, but one of his Sternritters, Royd Lloyd, using his powers to take on Yhwach's appearance. In actuality, Yhwach was meeting Aizen in a bid to get him to join his side as a special resource, but was refused. The kicker is the realization that Aizen's Zanpakuto ability, Kyoka Suigetsu, was able to affect Yhwach and made the time pass longer than it should have. This leads to Yhwach's actual confrontation with Yamamoto. It was quick and instant, as he took the Bankai of his killer using his medallion, since only he was powerful enough to handle such an overwhelming Bankai. He then obliterates the body with countless arrows and declares that the current Soul Society is weak, and they have been destined to fall since the first battle 1,000 years ago. Now Yhwach has had some of his revenge and acquired a deadly Bankai for him to use. Yhwach then deals with Ichigo, where we discover two key factors in his form. One is that Yhwach is so powerful that not even a force like Ichigo's Getsuga Tensho is of any use, and that Yhwach is still capable of making mistakes since he brought a pure Quincy to Ichigo, awakening his latent gifts. After that, Yhwach gathers his forces and declares that he will have a successor, Uryu Ishida. Yeah, apparently, he was the first to ever survive his Osweilen, and so clearly has more potential than him. It also indicates that Yhwach knows his time with his children is coming to an end, which means his planning abilities have evolved and go further than you think. Yhwach's next biggest moment arrives when he finally lands at the Royal Palace, the home of the Soul King and his royal guard. He marches forward and deals with the Shinigami in his way by unleashing from his shadow his Soldat, his soldiers, and his Shustafo, his elite guards. When they are killed, he uses Osweilen to bring them back using the power of the Stern Ritter below. He then goes to face the man who caused him quite a bit of grief, the monk Ichibe. This fight was legendary and shows how a lot of the techniques that higher level Quincy uses are more evolved in Yhwach's hands, like the Bleach technique, which normally only covers the skin, but he's evolved to becoming a bubble around him, calling it Bleach Anaben. Still, Ichibe looks to have the upper hand and sends him crashing down, only to see the man up and ready for action. That is because those 9 years he's waited for his powers to return have finally ended during his confrontation with Ichibe, and now Yhwach finally has access to his most powerful ability, Almighty. The Almighty is a pretty confusing technique. It is a power that belongs to the Soul King and is described by Ichibe as nigh omnipotence and omniscience. It allows one to see into possible futures, comprehend them, and then can decide which he would prefer. This power can be used by Yhwach as he has a strong link to the Soul King. However, despite how his iris initially splits into 2 and then 3 as it evolves, it's still not at the same level. With this, he kills Ichibe and moves on to finally meet his father after all these years and tries to grant him the peace of death. Unfortunately, he's interrupted by Ichigo, but Yhwach's already seen to this thanks to his Almighty. This is Yhwach's ability to plan in advance, staying one step ahead in a pretty literal sense. Turns out, Ichigo's strength and growth were a part of his plan to raise the kid enough to kill the Soul King, pulling a real Aizen there. He also shows just how strong he is by effortlessly dodging and deflecting a freshly trained Ichigo with ease. Mihimagi appears and disrupts Yhwach's plans, so he does the normal thing and absorbs this piece of the Soul King before taking on the rest of him, leading to the end of this form of Yhwach. As you've seen, this Yhwach is wiser, more careful, and a lot more powerful. However, you can still see the hints of that arrogance within him that caused his downfall. This is the 5th and final form of Yhwach, and there is frankly no greater form in all of Bleach. He uses this new power to begin creating a new country for the Quincy's and starts in the Soul King Palace, now called the Varvelt. He casually destroys 2 of his subordinates and goes to take a nap. There, he had a dream of Ichigo cutting him in half and refusing to truly change any of his plans. This shows that the old Yhwach's tendency for overconfidence is still there. He then confronts Ichigo again, claiming to be his true father, much to the latter's irritation, and states that he won't use his Almighty during the fight because he wants to savor the moment. Yhwach shows his skill with manipulation as he continues to aggravate and confuse Ichigo, making him sloppy, though it's clear that he could dodge or deflect most of the attacks pretty easily, as he's doing now with his Mirror Reiatsu. It took Ichigo unleashing his hollowified Shinigami powers for Yhwach to bother taking his broadsword out, though this fight is still a game to him. Eventually, Ichigo gets more powerful, so Yhwach proves his overwhelming force by displaying his now evolved Almighty. By absorbing the Soul King, Yhwach can now use the Almighty to a greater level, allowing him to change the future to such a point that even his death could be avoided, wherein he had to pick between options before. This does, however, come with the caveat that he can barely contain the Soul King's energy and is gradually becoming a linchpin for the world. Ichigo activates his Bankai, and most would be running away at this point, but all Yhwach does is grab the kid's sword and break the Bankai. Yhwach has no fear, as he can see and change all possible futures to his will, and Ichigo's prodigious strength means nothing. In fact, he proves how fragile it is by taking it all, both Hollow and Quincy, and leaves this once unbreakable man in despair. Yhwach's going on the deep end and activates Osweilen once more, wiping out his men and creating a portal to gloat at Aizen, his sense of reason and caution evaporating, making him cocky and careless as the end draws near. Yet it also seems that no attack can surprise him, since his Almighty allows him to see all of fate. Aizen joins the fight to no avail. Keep in mind that that man is an evolved being and the most dangerous threat to Soul Society before Yhwach and even a Hado number 99. Goryu Tenmetsu is of no effect on the man. It seems that no attack could harm him, making him invulnerable. Yhwach knocks them aside and shows the level of his power by becoming formless and enveloping all of Seirei in darkness as it becomes a part of him. This was Yhwach's moment of culmination and triumph. And he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for Uryu's silver arrow. This arrow was forged from the silver blood clot found in his mother after the Oswalin, and Uryu's father notes that it's pure poison to Quincy, so it should affect the father of Quincy's too. Ichigo takes out the original Zangetsu and cuts Yhwach in half, bringing the dream to reality and ending the final form. This was still the most powerful form. Yhwach's Reiatsu had no end and required no petty techniques. Combine it with the Almighty and he was invincible. In truth, the only thing that could kill him was his destined death. And so ends the tale of one of the strongest characters in Bleach history. This is the end of Yhwach, and it shows his greatest weakness. Not the silver arrow, but his overconfidence in himself and his ideals. His power made him believe that his destiny and will were absolute, and he underestimated the importance and value of those beings he once called lessers. And with that, we've come to the end of the video. If you like what you're seeing, make sure to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and smash that subscribe button and bell icon to keep updated. Oh, and before I forget, check out this video where I reveal what would happen if Yhwach actually won the Blood War.